All right, good morning. My name is Wesley Stefanik. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Association of Realtors. Thank you all for joining this morning for our special Drugs, Guns, and Open Houses session here just in time for September, which is Realtor Safety Month. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. The chat box will be open the entire time, so if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in there. Everyone will be muted. So please add them to the comment box. If you have a problem with the way your screen looks right now, there's a button at the top that says view. You can change the view. I believe it's a gallery setting or otherwise. If you have any problems or anything, feel free to join right back in the room and we can get you in. So with that, we're going to get right into it. I'd like to welcome Scott Deputy. Scott's a realtor, one of you. Scott will be leading today's session, and feel free to take it away, Scott.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wes. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking time to jump in our conversation here. I want to give again a thanks to Wes and the Delaware Association of Realtors for keeping Realtor Safety Month in mind, keeping our member safety in mind, and setting up programs like this. Some of you may or may not know that the National Association of Realtors actually surveys the membership on an annual basis around realtor safety. And I was looking at the 2021 report, and the number of incidents has actually gone down a little bit. One of the things I always look at is what's the percentage of members that have been made to feel uncomfortable or worse while working in their role as a real estate agent. And the percentage has actually gone down a good bit for 2021 compared to 2020. And it has to be a direct result of awareness, right? Programs like this that are driving awareness, that are changing agents' behaviors, that are being more proactive, putting more business practices in place, and therefore reducing the number of incidents. So that's an exciting thing. So today we're here to talk about open houses specifically. As Wes mentioned, it's drugs, guns, and open houses, and what the heck does all that have to do with each other? But the conversation around safety at open houses not only includes agent personal safety, but it also includes sellers' personal property safety, right? And so in that part of the conversation, we're going to talk about the drugs, we're going to talk about guns, and how we can be more aware and more proactive in the conversation with our seller clients on how to protect those things and keep them from being exposed and at risk if we're going to be hosting open houses. So today we have two special guests to help us in that conversation. We have Tracy Murphy, who is the Executive Director for the Delaware Coalition Against Gun Violence. So she's going to help us understand a little bit about how we can manage our sellers that do have firearms in the home. And we also have Brent Waniger. I'm hoping, Brent, that I'm saying your name correctly, but Brent is the Director of Executive Programs in the Grant Administration Unit for the Division of Health and Social Services at the state of Delaware. And he's going to help us understand how to mitigate risk as it relates to prescription drugs and so forth in the homes. So I'm excited to welcome you both, and we're going to start out with that part of our conversation today. So I'd like to bring in Tracy, if you're here, Tracy. We'd like to have you lead us off and talk about some considerations as it relates to firearms in our sellers' homes, and how do we keep them out of the conversation when it comes to our open houses. Thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us today.
Sure, thank you. And thanks to all of you for your work. My family has had many opportunities to engage with the real estate industry, and I have many friends who are in the real estate business. And just thank you, because you all make such a stressful process so much easier on your clients. And I think that is one of the things that I think makes this industry so powerful. So thank you. And thanks so much for including me. I am the Executive Director of Delaware's Coalition Against Gun Violence. And a lot of folks come to me and say, like, why are you trying to take away my guns? And I just want to be clear, I don't want them. I got 3 kids and like a lot going on here. I definitely don't want your guns. But what I do want is for all Delawareans to make safe choices around firearm handling. And that's really what our organization is about. We have been around just about 10 years. We were founded during a time of increasing awareness around gun violence issues, which many state agencies were also founded around the same time as ours. And that was around the time of the Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, which is coming up on 10 years ago. We are a statewide organization comprised of people from all walks of political life. We have gun owners on our board, concealed carry permit holders on our board of directors. We have veterans on our board. And we are really very focused on ending gun violence and not impacting gun ownership. And so I want to be really clear that while, of course, so much about gun violence is often politicized, our organization seeks to be apolitical, and we really work across the aisles to build permanent solutions to temporary problems, which is what gun violence often is. As I said, gun violence is a very complex issue, and complex issues, as you know, have no easy solutions. But I think that knowing a few things about gun violence will help folks in this conversation to be better prepared when showing homes, visiting homes, and engaging with your clients so that you can keep them safe in the homes that they are visiting and the homes that they buy. So I'm going to jump in with a couple of quick statistics, and then I'm going to talk about some sort of basic prevention best practices. And then finally, I'm going to share a couple of links in the chat so that you have some follow-up items. And finally, after that, I will put my email in the chat, and you're welcome. And I really encourage you to please reach out to me if you have specific questions that I could answer outside of the scope of this conversation, because I know I'm only one of a couple of speakers and I want to be respectful of your time. So finally, I want to share first and foremost that I recognize that both moving and major financial events are among the most stressful of lifetime events for people, right? Americans say year after year, among the most stressful lifetime events are saving for college, buying a car, major financial events, but also moving is a big part of that. And I also recognize that not all new home purchases or sales are happy events. And so I think what we're talking about here is not just open house safety for someone who might happen upon a firearm, but really about keeping your clients safe even after this transaction has completed. And to that end, more than 50% of gun deaths each year in Delaware and nationwide are due to suicide. And we often hear similarly that gun violence is related to mental illness, and that is not the case except for where suicide is the issue. Firearms account for 8% of suicide attempts, but more than 50% of suicide deaths, meaning that firearms are the most lethal means of suicide. And when we talk about suicide in Delaware, we recognize that firearms are a large culprit of that. And there are a couple of specific policies and a couple of specific best practices that can prevent firearm suicide. And I'm going to put one of them in the chat right now. Forgive me, I'm a little slow typing. Oops, that's wrong. Hang on one second. The Lethal Violence Protection Order was passed in 2018, and it was passed unanimously in the General Assembly. 100% of the Republicans and the Democrats voted for it. And I think that's important because we get a lot of questions around, oh, well, it doesn't afford due process, and it really does. And we know that because every single lawmaker in Delaware supported it. And quite honestly, a lot of them are lawyers. And they go through these policies very carefully to make sure that, in fact, we are affording due process to everyone involved. A lethal violence protection order is a temporary order that can remove firearms from the premise during a time of crisis. And this is something that your clients may not know about, but if they're dealing with a specific life issue that is causing a lot of stress and they own firearms, it might be something that you want to share with them. And the link includes a video series to talk a little bit about how these orders work and how you can enact them. The other thing that's really important is that Delaware has a safe storage law. Safe or secure storage means that firearms are stored securely. That means they are unloaded, they are locked, and they are separate from ammunition. And that is a storage requirement for homes where persons prohibited or children, who are, of course, persons prohibited, are present. And this might be something that you want to always ask your clients as you are preparing for open houses, because all firearms should not be accessible by anyone but the owner of those firearms. And in addition to that, ammunition should be locked and stored separately. That is a law that was passed in, I want to say 2019, and has been enforced throughout the state, primarily through public messaging campaigns like this one. And so we encourage all firearm owners to store their firearms appropriately. And in fact, if you or any of your clients need a gun lock, we can provide them for free. We work with the Veterans Administration to provide free gun locks to not only veterans, but anyone in reach of our message who is in need of one. And I would be happy to send a box of them to your offices or send them out to you personally, if that's something that you think would be of interest and of necessity. And I think it's one of those conversations that I think once you have it, people understand, like, oh, wow, yeah, firearm theft is a really big deal. You're inviting strangers into your home. You want to make sure that any firearms you do own and have legally purchased end up staying right in your home. And one of the best ways to make sure that firearms don't take a walk during an open house is to make sure they are safely and securely stored. We provide cable locks. Unfortunately, we do not have the budget or a FedEx carrier who could provide gun safes. But for people who own firearms that need to be, that are of such an ample quantity or size that they need to be stored in a gun safe, we really do recommend that. And you can buy them almost wherever firearms are sold. And I'm going to dump into the chat now a list of, if I can find it in my link list, a list of federally licensed, or access to a list of federally licensed firearm dealers. This is also a really good link for if your clients are interested in finding out if there are federally licensed firearm dealers near where they live. Federally licensed firearm dealers, there are about 150 in the state of Delaware, which there are about 40 Wawas. So that gives you a sense of how close you are at any given time to a federally licensed firearm dealer. And some of them are, in fact, in residential neighborhoods. Anyone who buys and sells firearms, sells firearms or buys to then resell, so trade, or does firearm repairs, needs to hold a federal firearm license. And a lot of those folks are in residential areas. So that might be something that your clients want to consider. And it's information that I think can be helpful to you when you are working with, excuse me, the people in your client base. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the sort of misconceptions around gun violence, because I think it's really important that folks recognize that that gun violence, I think, is a little bit differently portrayed in the media than it is in reality. As I mentioned, more than 50% of gun deaths each year are due to firearm suicide. There have been over 300 mass shootings so far in 2022. And gun-related death is the leading cause of death for American children. That is what prompted me to get involved in this work. I have 3 children. And my pediatrician told me when my twins were 18 months, just put them to bed alive. And so I've made it my business to do that every day since. But I recognize that there are certain risk factors that make that harder. there are two different demographic groups that bear the brunt of escalating gun violence, and they are most likely to die of a gunshot wound in America. They are young Black men and older white men. White men are 6 times as likely to die by suicide as other Americans. Black men are 17 times as likely to be killed with a gun fired by somebody else. I think that when we're talking specifically about real estate safety, open houses, you're looking at largely the impacts of gun violence on older white men and suicide. And it's important to recognize that men are nearly 4 times as likely as women to die in a suicide attempt, mainly because they are much more likely to use a gun. So the risk factors, or I'm sorry, the protective factors I already mentioned, lethal violence protection orders, safe storage, and just a general increase around gun violence and the prevalence of gun violence are all ways that we can work together to prevent gun violence and suicide by gun. And I think that that's something that's important for the industry to recognize, particularly as gun violence is on the rise in America, due largely to several precipitating events that led to very high levels of gun sales. And those precipitating events in most recent history were the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020. Again, in April of 2020, we sold more guns in the state of Delaware than on any month before on record. That happened again in June of 2020 in the wake of the George Floyd killing and all of the subsequent protests. And then it happened again around the January 6th event. And all of these events indicate a high level of emotional purchases on behalf of new and existing firearm owners. And so we recognize that all of those gun sales lead to more guns in circulation, more guns in homes, more guns in vehicles, and more guns more likely to be stolen and used for nefarious purposes or misplaced in a home and sort of forgotten about and left behind. And so I think if we can keep firearm safety and firearm violence prevention at the forefront when we are engaging with new clients, when we're engaging in new homes, we will find that we can contribute to a decline in firearm violence. So thank you for listening to me. It's hard to do these talks and not get feedback from an audience, but I'm eager to connect with all of you, excuse me, offline. And I'm going to dump one more link in the chat, which is just a link to our organization's website so that you can sign up for our emails or sign up to learn more about the work that we do if you are so inclined. And I thank you again for including me.
Yeah, Tracy, thank you so much for that information. And thanks to your organization for the work that you're doing. It is, so important. There's a few things here I just want to restate that I think are super useful for the members on the call today. One is we should be more aware of including this in our conversation with our seller clients, right? As we engage in a new listing, a new seller client, potentially, we need to add the question to the interview, so to speak. Do you have firearms in the home? Now, sometimes it's obvious, right? You walk through a house and there's a giant safe in the basement or somewhat, the garage, and you kind of know, and that triggers a conversation. But if that's not, visibly easy to locate, it still should be part of the interview process with a new seller client, right? To say, by the way, are there any firearms present in the household? And if the answer is yes, then that should trigger a whole other sequence of questions and information gathering. And if it doesn't seem like it's properly secured, then, Tracy, you provided a great resource to get those locks. So having that in our toolbox, just to create this awareness, because I think a lot of us wouldn't even think of asking that question as part of the initial conversation there as we get started, because, as we expose the house to the buying public, whether that's through an open house or showings or otherwise, it's an important thing to understand. You can't leave that to chance, right? Because that one time that it's overlooked and then you have a somewhat careless gun owner, it can lead to a disastrous situation. So I love that. Thank you for bringing that awareness. So hopefully everyone here is taking some notes to say, hey, I got to include this question in my interview process with my seller clients. And depending on the answer to that question, do I provide these other resources that Tracy, you've given us today? So thank you again for that.
Sure. I think you make an important point, right? I imagine that part of the open house preparation checklist is making sure that valuables are not easily accessible. And I think sometimes we think of valuables as jewelry. We think of valuables as small technology that could go for a walk, an iPad or a laptop or something. I'm not sure that people are always thinking about firearms in terms of a valuable, but they have one of the highest resale markets. And that makes them inherently valuable to people who are ill-intended. And so I think it's important to recognize that as well. And you make a great point about that.
Yeah, thank you. I see a question from Renee. Are there incidents in Delaware with firearm theft around real estate? I don't know if you would have an answer to a question like that, Tracy. I know that I do not.
I don't. And I think it's a great question. I don't know that there's any data around that. But I imagine that if there was, it would be similarly found in any other areas around theft involving real estate. So you can imagine that if there's some percentage of open houses that result in a theft or a misplacement of a valuable item, that firearms could be included in that. There is a high resale market for firearms, and that's getting a little higher because Delaware law and the laws in surrounding states are making firearms a little more, they're looking at firearm purchases with a more critical eye and making sure that we are doing a better job of regulating who can get their hands on firearms, which of course fuels an underground market in firearms and in every other example.
Yeah, great. One thing that I would add to that, Renee, and everyone on the call here, is that one thing that I'm really focused on messaging these days is communication, right? So one of the ways that we would know about that type of thing is if our members would do a better job of reporting incidences back to the state level, back to your county association, back to your broker. Just report it, whether it's personal property theft, whether it's a personal safety incident, but we can do a better job as a membership of communicating these types of things that we run into if we happen to run into them. And then that would help us compile information and data and statistics around things like that. But I find in my conversations around realtor safety that a lot of times incidents occur and then they're never spoken of again unless someone like me is standing in front of a classroom saying, has anyone had an incident? And then finally someone raises their hand. So communication is super important with this kind of stuff. But Tracy, thank you so much again for the information and for the work you're doing. And I hope everyone grabbed your information out of the chat. And you can certainly be a great resource to our membership here. So thank you again.
Sure thing. Thank you again for including me. And I look forward to coming back maybe at a time when we're back in person for these kinds of events. And again, if any of the specific agencies or agents would like more information, they can reach out to me and I'm happy to bring more information forward as well. So thank you. Thanks again for including me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's move on. So that was our guns portion. Let's move on to now our drugs portion. And again, I think a big takeaway right out of the gate here is having these questions at the ready as we go into this relationship with the seller, understanding what's present in the household. And so, of course, the next part of that is going to be around prescription medication and so forth. So excited to bring you in, Brent, to help us understand the considerations and precautions that we should be communicating to our sellers as it relates to drugs in the home. So thank you, Brent.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So as Scott mentioned, my name is Brent Waninger. I am the Director of Executive Programs and Grant Administration at the state's Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, which is part of the Department of Health and Social Services. I'm going to share my screen. I have just a couple, literally just a couple slides to share with you just to keep me on track. And then I'm getting warning about bandwidth. So I'm going to drop off of video so I don't cut out on you, but I'll come back at the end. Scott, are you seeing my screen? Okay. All right. I appreciate it. So the first thing I want to talk about is I've been in this work since 2016, since I came to the state. I was in public education before that, and transferred over to the Division of Public Health in 2016 and started working in this. So I have a very good understanding of where we are and kind of how we got to this point. But every day I'm talking to people that aren't in this world every day, all day, and really don't have that kind of same background. So I just wanted to put this up for you. This shows sort of the different phases of the overdose crisis that we've been having in US history since the 60s. So as many people will know, the heroin epidemic that really came to light in the 70s, followed by the crack cocaine epidemic that came out in the early 80s and the 90s, or late 80s and early 90s. The early 2000s was the boom of prescription opioids. Really, we saw very high levels of prescription writing, marketing, and advertisement from pharmaceutical companies around opioids and their benefits and their limited drawbacks, which was all false now that we know that. But that prescription opioid peak really targeted some action in the early 2010s by the federal government and the state governments in cracking down on prescriptions, which then led to another resurgence in the early 10s on heroin. And I'll talk about this in just a minute, but then the transition from heroin over the last just couple of years to synthetic opioids. And synthetic opioids are things like fentanyl, which I'm quite sure most people have heard of at this point. Significantly more powerful, significantly more potent. And specifically to this conversation today, what's referred to as illicitly manufactured fentanyl, or IMF. So this issue really does then impact the illicit pill market. And that's why after the prescription opioid epidemic in the early 10s or the late 90s, we saw, or the early 2000s, sorry, we saw that resurgence of heroin in the 2010s because it's prescription drug use and prescription drug misuse that has led to the illicit market. Once those prescription sources dry up, individuals who have become addicted to these substances then turn to alternative sources, and alternative sources being the illegal drug market. So much so currently with synthetic opioids that it's come into the illicit pill market. The DEA has launched and is currently running a One Pill Can Kill campaign, trying to target the danger of getting illicitly manufactured pills from the street. Those that were using authentic prescription medications that have then turned to illicitly obtained fake prescription medications. Most of the time, those illicitly manufactured products contain fentanyl and lead to deaths and unintentional deaths by individuals that thought they were buying a prescription medication on the street for lower cost or easier access or whatever the issue may be. So getting back to sort of what the purpose is and why it is that you guys should care as realtors. So the prescription drug issue is still a major pipeline into substance use disorder, and that is the clinical diagnosis for addiction, especially for children and teens as they enter into the world where I see them on the back end as clients in the treatment system. Their origins really do come from mom, dad, brother, sister, grandma's medicine cabinet, where they started to access prescription medications and take prescription medications and then transitioned into harder substances or an easier way to access those substances when the prescriptions ran out. Specifically around open houses, when those prescription sources start to dry up, individuals will seek out new sources. And so if the immediate family members' prescriptions have run out, individuals will then start to target other sources. And so not always do people jump to illegal purchases in the underground drug market. A lot of times they will go out and search for other areas and easily accessible venues. Open houses are a really accessible venue into somebody's medicine cabinet where they may not think or may not have thought to secure their prescription medications or their high dose medications prior to doing so. And put away doesn't necessarily mean secured. It means out of sight and out of mind. And so one of the things that I want to encourage you guys to talk about with your seller clients is ensuring that those medications are not just put away, but are secured. Closing a medicine cabinet does not prevent somebody from opening the medicine cabinet and taking a prescription bottle out of that cabinet, or even just taking pills out of the bottle in order to avoid suspicion. So it may not even get reported. It may not even be known that it happened until they go for their pill count later on these high dose medications, and they're short 3 or 4 pills because they went missing during this open house. So ensure that those are not just put away, but secured, and that if they do have high dose or highly sought after illicit or highly sought after prescription medications, that they remove them from their medicine cabinet and store them somewhere else, somewhere secure where they're not accessible to the public. The other thing that you guys can do, and that I will ask you to do, is to ensure that you understand and help your clients to understand what resources exist, what is available, what the state has available for individuals that are suffering, not just from substance abuse or substance misuse, but also any mental health concern. So helpisherede.com is sort of the state's public access portal for everything related to the opioid crisis. There's treatment information on there. There's general information on there. There's links about what fentanyl is and why it's so important and why it's so dangerous. But it really is a joint effort between the divisions of public health and my division for substance abuse and mental health to get information out and easily accessible to the public. So a wealth of information. There's sometimes too much information on that website. It can become a little bit overbearing. The other thing I want to point out to you are naloxone trainings. So naloxone is the opioid overdose reversal medication known by the brand name Narcan. We do training events in every county and trying to get this medication into the hands of individuals that are likely to use it. And so not just individuals, because you can't self-administer when you're overdosing, individuals that are likely to come across. So friends, family members, bystanders, good Samaritans on the street that are walking by that happen to see somebody down in the parking lot of a Wawa or in the bathroom of a Royal Farms, which we see increasingly more of. The other option I want to make sure that you guys are aware of is the Hope Line. So Delaware established the Hope Line during COVID, and we are continuing to operate that hotline. It is a general helpline. It's not for individuals that are immediately in crisis. It's for anybody that just needs to talk. They're struggling with something. Obviously, selling their house is a major emotional issue to go through. If they need help to just deal, or they want to talk through something, or they want to talk about something, or they just need somebody to vent to, that's what the Hope Line is for. So it's not, I need treatment, can you help me get me into treatment? They can do that, but it's really for anybody and everybody that needs somebody to talk to or some guidance on how do I handle this? How do I deal with this? So it's a really good resource that I encourage you to use and share with everybody. There are crisis hotlines, obviously, if individuals are actively struggling, or a youth, a child in their family that is in crisis, that is actively struggling and they're trying to get help. There are crisis lines and crisis numbers for those purposes. There's also bridge clinics. DSAM, my division, staffs bridge clinics in each county. There are 2 in Newcastle County, 1 in Kent and 1 in Sussex, and they are both in person and by phone, but those are basically drop-in centers that can talk to individuals that are interested about, looking for, or want to know more about treatment options in the state. And then for those that are seeking treatment for some kind of an issue, there is a website, treatmentconnection.com, which is our public side of the referral network that we manage, showing you what services are available. There's an assessment on that website, a self-assessment that can be taken by an individual or for an individual that you're concerned about, or a friend or family member, to identify, okay, what, based on what you know, what would a likely treatment need to be, and then what agencies have those treatment options, where are those treatment options located, who's taking insurance and what insurance, and who has openings to take new patients, all on that website. So it is a really good wealth of resources and information there too. So just to circle back as I end this and come back to you on video. Just to sort of reinforce a couple of those points. So the medicine cabinet is not a secured place to store medications, especially when you have visitors, or in the case of an open house, random strangers walking through the house. So please I encourage you to talk to your clients and your sellers about securing their medicines and getting them out of an easily accessible place by those that are walking through the house and the building. And I will open up for questions if you have any.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Brent, for that information. Just a couple of quick thoughts on that. So one is, again, we as Realtor members need to be more intentional with these conversations, right? We need to be direct and, making sure we have these questions at the ready, and then have the answer to say, hey, yes, I do have these medications in the house. Okay, let's talk about the plan to get those secured and make sure they're nowhere to be found, because people are looking, right? To your point, people are looking, they're looking for low-hanging fruit, easy ways to resupply their need, and it's out there, it happens. And it's not just members of the public. I know I personally had an incident with a service provider, a contractor, who came into my home to complete a certain type of repair. After the work was completed, we realized that we've been something was missing, and so it's out there, it's real, and we need to be really intentional and direct with these conversations with our seller clients. My other thought with this information, Ben, is, thank you for educating us on these resources. As Realtor members, a lot of times we are leaders in the communities that we serve, and being more educated with these types of things is such an important part of our toolbox. That's the word I like to use. I use it with Tracy as well, but having this kind of information in our toolbox to just be better members of our community, I think it's incredible. So thank you again for that info, and thanks for all the Realtor members who showed up here today to receive this information to help us all be better, not just Realtors, but better members of our communities. So thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? Any questions for Brent? Awesome. Let's see, what are we able to do on behalf of clients who do not realize they are in crisis? Okay, we have a question from Nancy that says, what are we able to do on behalf of clients who do not realize they are in crisis?
Sure. So that's a difficult question to answer, and one that a lot of people face. What do you do when you think somebody needs help, but they don't think they need help? And it leaves you sort of in this awkward dynamic of, how much do you step in and how much do you push? The realization is an individual isn't going to be successful unless they're ready, willing, and able. And so sometimes they're ready and willing, but they're just not able. And sometimes they're able and they're just not ready or willing. And we see that all the time. And so engaging with them as often as possible, bringing this up to the forefront and not ignoring and shying away from the conversation is probably the best advice that I can give to you. Is, there's no need to be confrontational if they're not ready, just firm and reaffirming, that you see an issue, you see a problem, bringing that to their attention, identifying, hey, look, I think this is getting to a level where, you might want to seek help. You might want to reach out to somebody. There are options, there are things that you can do. And just being firm and consistent is probably your best option than trying, okay, you need to come with me, get in the car right now, we're driving, I'm going, we're going to check you in somewhere, because then ultimately they're not going to stay and it's not going to be successful or helpful. And so I would just say to be consistent, don't shy away from that conversation, bring it up and say, hey, look, I'm noticing some things. Can I talk to you? Are you okay? Do you need to talk to somebody? Do you need some help? Maybe it's not me, maybe it's somebody else, but referring them to one of the resources that I listed for you, just as an offering, hey, look, there's, the Hope Line is completely confidential. It's not, they're not going to call you back and follow up with you 3 days later unless you want them to. Same thing with the Bridge Clinic. They can drop in, stop in, just chat and talk and see, what the options are, or what they should be aware of. When does it become an addiction, and when is when does that transition look like? When can you tell that it's time? And the counselors that do all of those intake assessments are really good at that.
And along with those resources, Brent, someone looks like Pat is asking if you are able to send slide 5, which is, I guess, maybe that list of resources.
Yeah, the whole slide deck you can share out with your listserv or whatever. Yeah, definitely you can send that to whoever wants it.
Perfect.
I'll go one step further for you too. I mean, if there is some interest in learning more, in really getting a better understanding of substance abuse and the opioid epidemic and crisis, we are holding a 3-day in-person conference under the State Opioid Response Grant in Wilmington in 1 week exactly, next Monday. So if there's any interest in that, they can reach out, I guess, to you, Scott, and then you can forward them to me, or we'll give you the agenda and the registration links. But if any of your members want to come or are interested in a couple sessions and learning and hearing, I encourage you to come out to that, because it's a free event. You just have to register for it because I have to do a lunch count.
That's great. Yeah, appreciate that. And Wes chimed in the chat that you can anyone here in the group can email him at info@delawarerealtor.com. It's in the chat there, and you can get these follow-up resources and more information about Brent and what his department are up to in serving the community. So thank you again, Brent. Again, appreciate the education and the awareness. It's such an important conversation. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Yep. Thank you. Okay. All right. So that's a little bit about some considerations regarding your seller's personal property. All right. And I like to think of that as valuables, right? We do talk about securing valuables. That's kind of a common thing that most of us think about. But it goes a little deeper, right? Adding these couple things to our list of quote unquote valuables, I think is a really great idea. And again, add these questions specifically to your interview process, as you get started. All right, so let's, with a little bit of time we have remaining, looks like we got about 15 minutes or so to go. I just wanted to finish up by talking a little bit more again about personal safety as it relates to our members hosting open houses. Because again, we do all this marketing and we put ourselves out there in a very public way and invite the public to come find us at 123 Main Street on a certain day at a certain time, bright lights, balloons, the whole thing. And so what are some things that we should be thinking about proactively so that as we invite the public, we also don't invite, some trouble along with that. So I have a few things, about 6 points I just want to run through. I don't have a slide deck or anything, but I just want to run through these, and you can take some notes, or maybe even we'll get some feedback from you guys as well as other ideas. If you have something to add to the group here, that might be a great idea that we haven't thought of or talked about. So, but the first thing that I would mention, the first tip, I guess, around personal safety is just having some awareness around the property and around any safety precautions that may exist in the property for your safety and the public's, right? So, loose steps or, slip and fall hazards, things like that to be aware of before the door is open and the balloons are up, right? Getting some time to really study where am I putting myself for these next 2-3 hours, whatever it's going to be, right? So having some awareness about the property, what are the entry points and exit points? And having, along with that, having just one point of entry, right? So I think it's pretty common practice. You go to your open house and you open up everything, right? All the entry points are open up, front door, back door, garage, everything is wide open. And so something that I would ask you to consider is maybe have more control of the traffic flow by only having one point of entry, and then having a process to sort of follow up as people do visit and take themselves out the back and into the garage and different places. Make sure you're just monitoring that and maybe resecuring when the time is appropriate, but not just having everything open all the time, because it's much harder to keep track of who's coming and going that way. Another part of having awareness around the property is understanding, is there anything here in the house that if I get into some trouble, physically, is there anything around that might help me, you know, from a safety standpoint, from a self-protection standpoint? And I don't mean, you know, the knives in the drawer or in the cutlery block. I'm talking about things like an umbrella or a baseball bat or a hockey stick that might be in a bedroom or near the front door. Just taking notice of those things that you might be able to use to protect yourself with, versus, you know, something that you don't have a lot of expertise around. But just having a good awareness around the property itself and what's around in the property ahead of letting the public come in. Second thing I want to bring up is to meet the neighbors, right? Put some people on notice who you are and what you're doing and how long you expect to be there, right? We should be doing that as professionals anyway, you know, to increase our probabilities of adding clients to our book of business. So meet the neighbors prior to going to your open house. You know, pull up and ahead of time and find some people that might be outside doing yard work, or knock on a door or two and just say, hey, I'm across the street. I tend to be here for a couple of hours doing the open house. You know, do you have any questions, right? Make a friend, right? Because now they're going to be paying attention. They're going to be looking out the window anyway to see how many people are going through. They're always interested and nosy about those types of things, but make a point to meet people and put them on notice. You know, introduce yourself so that you have extra eyes watching out for you. All right. Another point is taking control of the sign-in process, right? So I think, again, sometimes we have this cooperation with the public where we don't really enforce the sign-in process, and we can do better as a membership at that. So think of ways that you can force more readily an actual sign-in or identification process, and you can blame it on someone else, blame it on the seller, blame it on your broker, blame it on, you know, my company's policy, whatever it is. But I can't allow you to walk through here until you sign in here and register for our open house today, right? And getting a little tougher and intentional around enforcing that. One thing that I like as an idea around sign-ins and registration is having a giveaway, right? Everyone wants to be a winner, right? So have some sort of little giveaway as part of your open house. Hey, sign in here. We're going to do you know, a drawing at the end of the open house for Amazon gift card, or, you know, whatever, you name it, some small item of value. But people will be more likely to give you real information if they know something's at stake, right? Because in the past, we all know that we get, you know, half the people don't want to sign in. The other half that do, half of them only give you, you know, fake information. And so how do we get better at enrolling people to give their information? How do we identify? Another thought along that is to meter the entrance, right? So not letting anyone and everyone come in all at the same time, where it gets harder and harder to keep track of who's who and personal property, but maybe have a limit. And we kind of got good at this during 2020, right? Where we had these distancing rules in place. Why not keep them in place now and say, hey, look, we have a couple parties already in the house. I'm going to ask you to wait here until, you know, these parties are through, and then we'll let the next group through, right? But having some ground rules and some authority in the open house, and not just let people run right over you and expect, you know, that they can have it their way because it's an open house, right? Have some rules around that and raise the barrier to entry, if you will. Next one, some of you, I see a lot of familiar faces in the group here, which is great. And some of you have been through my CE class on realtor safety. But something I talk about all the time is investing in a wearable safety technology, right? There are a lot of great products on the market today, wearable things that have panic button devices that work through your phone via Bluetooth, where you can get help in an instant by pressing on a panic button. And there's some brands I like to recommend, like Invisiware. NAR has endorsed a couple products like Invisiware and the Katana security system. These are wearable safety technologies that act sort of like your home security system, that you hit the panic button, the call for help goes out, right? And you don't have to waste time with calling 911 or trying to figure out how to get someone on the phone. You can hit the button and get help much more quickly if you're feeling uncomfortable or get into a situation where you feel like you're in danger. So I encourage everyone to do your own shopping there, but investigate, do some online searching for wearable personal safety devices or safety technology. There are a lot of great things out there. They're very affordable. modest investment. And of course, I believe that all of us should have it, whether you're a Realtor member or not. Our friends and family should be in possession of these types of wearable safety technologies to keep them safe and to get help faster, because seconds matter, right? And then last but not least, the biggest one, the easiest one that I can think of to help keep us safe at our open houses is just don't do them alone anymore. For too long, agents are out there doing open houses by themselves, all alone. And it just doesn't make any sense, right? There's safety in numbers. It's easy to find an open house partner, whether it be your lender partner, most of which are very willing and able to come join you at your open house and participate in some way, which is awesome. Find a colleague from your office, and maybe a new agent, a brand new agent that is looking for some shadow time is a great idea for an open house partner. If you are a brand new agent, bring an experienced agent, right? So that you can get some face time with someone who's been in the business a little longer. But buddy up. And then last but not least, if a lender partner is not available, if a colleague isn't available, nothing says, there are no laws that say that your open house partner needs to be a licensed agent. So bring a friend, bring a family member, bring someone with you, get an extra set of eyes and ears, not only on you, but also on the property and the seller's personal property. You know, if the open house is busy, we need to control the flow of people, but we also need to keep an eye on who's where and what are they up to. So always have a partner. And most importantly with that, what we know for sure from a data standpoint is the most dangerous points of your open house are the beginning and the closing, right? So a lot of the stories that I've heard in teaching my class around open house problems is usually at the end of the day, right? So right at the end, I was locking up and someone came in right at the end and then they wouldn't leave. And then I had a problem, right? So if you can't get a partner to be with you for your entire open house, then please, please, please make arrangements to have someone with you when you open up and when you close up shop, and have them get there early before the end of the open house so that they can be there with you so that you can avoid any last minute complications. But please don't do your open houses alone. That's the easiest thing. There's safety in numbers. It's the easiest way to help keep yourself safe while doing an open house. And it might be a better experience for you and the people coming through anyway, if there's multiple licensed people or a lender partner. So that's what I got. I was moving pretty quick there on those tips, but let's open it up. Who has some thoughts? I see Renee, you have a suggestion, it looks like. So if you want to drop it in the chat, or we can possibly unmute if we want to go one at a time and jump in on the conversation, questions or ideas. All right, let me see if I can find you, Renee. There we go.
Okay, hi. So I'm also a registered nurse, and I have some psych training when I did, that that little stint in nursing. But one of the things I use that training in open houses or even showing homes. And one suggestion is to always leave you near the exit door. So don't let someone get between you and the exit door. So that means having them go in front of you at all times and you staying near the exit doors. Same thing with steps. And sometimes I've had this, especially being a woman, and with men, they always want to let you go ahead, and that's them being nice. But I've, had to say, no, you go. And it's went back and forth a couple times to where I've had to say, no, you're going to go ahead of me for safety. And, you just have to put your foot down about it. But that's one thing I always am trying to be aware of, is making sure I'm near the exit and that person's not in between me and the exit.
Love that. That's a great tip, Renee. That's part of situational awareness, in my opinion, right? It's just understanding who's in front of who, where are the exits, and how can I get to safety quickly. So I love that. Always keep yourself between them and the door, and let them enter the rooms always in front of you. I love it. I love it. Especially, of course, basements and anything like that. Let them go and keep yourself closer to the door than they are. That's great. Thank you so much, Renee.
Sure.
Let's see. I see another question here in the chat. How comfortable should we be having a person with a firearm during an open house? I'm sure it's okay. So let's see. So the question, I think, and is it Josari? I hope I'm saying your name right. if someone is coming through, so a member of the public is coming through the open house with a firearm? Is that your question? I see a yes, so I think that's, if it's a concealed carry, I don't know, how obvious that could be or wouldn't be, but if I guess someone had it unconcealed, again, you have to sort of take charge of that situation, right? If you notice someone coming through, but this is why these conversations are so interesting. There are so many scenarios that can arise in the work that we do. Like, what if someone comes in the house and they, you can see their sidearm on their person? Like, what do you do? But there's no right or wrong answer, I don't think, for something like this. But what is important is sitting down proactively and thinking through these types of things. What would I do if that happened to me? What would I do? Would I stand at the gate and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to need you to remove your sidearm and leave it in your vehicle before you come through our open house? Right? It's your rules. Right, so just know what you might do in that situation. I have had that type of scenario. Someone in Sussex County shared with me once that they were meeting a couple to show a property, and the couple arrived. It was one of these types of days where it's kind of chilly in the morning, warmer in the afternoon. They arrive at the property, they get out of the car, they take off their coats, both of them with sidearms. And this agent was firm. She asked them both to remove the sidearms and leave them in the vehicle. They were good, upstanding citizens of the world. They complied. They had the showing. It was a successful event. But that's a great point. And so my suggestion would be to just decide proactively, if you're not comfortable or you think other visitors wouldn't be comfortable, then you have to stand up and enforce some rules around that. Let's see. David Kelly says, never park in a place where someone can block you in. That's right. Don't park in the driveway where someone can park behind you, or if it's an urban setting, don't slide into the tightest spot you can find just because it's in front of the house, right? Give yourself a little breathing room so that if you have to get to your car and get the heck out of there, make sure you can do that in an unobstructed way. Love that. What else? Any ideas or any questions about anything we covered today? We're getting close to the top of the hour. These safety conversations, Wes, they always fly by. It never surprises me how quickly they go. Let's see.
Yeah, Scott, let me jump in there real quick. If you're having issues with the info email address, change info and just put Wes, W-E-S, and I can respond directly back with the slides. That's fine. Scott, if you don't mind, real quick, I wanted to talk about one other item for everybody. And this is kind of a thrown on topic, even though it shouldn't be. It should be a whole session on its own. But because this is about realtor safety, there's another component that the National Association of Realtors wants everyone to be aware of, and that is the increase in sex trafficking. I'm not going to go into this right now, but I'm going to include a link in the chat box. The National Association of Realtors partnered with an organization called On Watch, and they designed a whole training program to educate realtors to be aware and on watch about possible sex trafficking incidents that may be occurring. So take a look at that website. That'll give you much more information. But NAR has joined this organization to try to make a difference and try to increase the amount of incidents that are reported for sex trafficking.
That's awesome. Thank you, Wes. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I didn't know about that resource either. So again, this conversation, it's so useful, right? We're not just talking about our own safety. We're just talking about getting better educated around all things safety and even for others, right? So just having these kind of resources is just an incredible opportunity to help us, as I mentioned earlier, to be sort of better members of our community and being the eyes and ears. And, we do find ourselves in engaging with the public in so many different ways, sometimes counselor, right? and so forth. So having these types of resources is just invaluable. So thank you, Wes, for adding that in. Appreciate that. So we are at the top of the hour. Anyone have any last suggestions or questions? If not, we'll wrap it up here and move on.
Thank you, Scott, for hosting today's session. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Wes. Thank you again so much for having me and creating a program like this to help our members be better educated and more aware out there in the field.
Of course, yeah. And thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, Nancy.